It's my favorite time of the month because I get to share 20 really cool items with you, and we're going to list them on eBay right now while you watch, so let's go. The first one is really fun, just in time for Halloween. We're going to do shorter auctions this week and do some buy it nows on these things so that you can get them in time for your celebrations. And this is just the witchiest witch. I really enjoy this one. She's rather large, which is nice compared to a lot of these, and she's got the honeycomb fold out. It's in pretty good shape overall. She is by the Bristol Company. Stir stick has a little bit of a fold line, and there might be a few tiny tears down where the honeycomb joins in, but really overall she's in great shape. I love that she has the cauldron. Bristol Company started because a fellow by the name of Bristol worked for the Pittsburgh Art Calendar Company, and he would go around to hotels to sell them calendars, and he kept hearing them talking about how much of a pain it was to water all the flowers in the lobbies of the hotels. And he said, hey, why don't we make paper flowers? And that is how all this cool stuff started. A couple of years later, he was in Heidelberg, Germany, and he was watching them doing the honeycombing. And he said, hey, if we could make paper fold out in a honeycomb, we could do some really cool stuff. And he invented the process and the machinery to do this. And so this little family-run company, which is still a family-run company all these years later, has gone just crazy. They have over 10,000 different things in their line now. This one's going to date to about the 1970s in all likelihood, because they started to do a little more facial detail. If you remember, the ones from the 50s are a lot more simple in their design. But I think she's just great. She's got their name on the inside when you fold the honeycomb, so you know right away who she is. And they are just really something fun for the holidays. And kids have been delighted by these for decades, apparently for over a century. I had no idea they'd been around so long. So this lovely lady can come to you. We're going to start her at $9.99, but we will have a buy it now because, like I said, if you want her in time for this Halloween, we can get her shipped out right away. Keeping with the fall theme, our next item is orange, and it's a piece I really enjoy. My mother was a Libra, and this is the Blanco Libra paperweight. It also came as a sun catcher. You notice this little hole here. They could pierce them all the way through, and then you would hook them up as sun catchers, and in the catalogs, that's how they are shown, but they actually could be used either way. Blanco came out with these in 1970. It was the beginning of their Zodiac line. A lot of companies got into doing the Zodiac because so many people got into the Zodiac. In the late 60s, there was the movie Hair and the song The Age of Aquarius, and the beginning of a thought that, hey, maybe the stars do control our destiny, and people really took off with it. In fact, by the 1970s, hey babe, what's your sign? Was the cliche pickup line in bars, and has become a cliche 70s saying that people still laugh about. But it was based on the fact that a whole lot of people took up astrology at that time. And they did want to know what their sun sign was. And if they got really sophisticated, they got into their moon sign and their rising sign. And it caught on with all sorts of people. Even First Lady Nancy Reagan in the 1980s was using astrologers to help plot their course through the White House. So this was a cultural phenomenon that went to a lot of levels of society. And the American home decor makers, well, they figured it out really fast. You could see astrological sign circles decorating posters and rugs, Hager pottery ashtrays, Blanco pieces, cocktail recipe books, costume jewelry, even underpants came with astrological symbols on them. It was the 70s after all. Blanco, of course, being such a good glass company, still in business today, making a lot more lines and has a lot of designers involved that are either guest designers or new to the company. And so it's very exciting to see them as they are progressing. And if you ever want to look at the rest of the Zodiac line, you can go to Blanco.com and look through their old catalogs. They publish all of them by year online. So start around 1970, and you'll be able to see all of the different astrological symbols that they made. This one is going to start at $19.99, and We'll probably do a buy it now on this as well. We do auctions to see a snapshot of the market as it is today. And we do some buy it nows because this video is sponsored by our level 2 and level 3 members. And we are very grateful for their memberships. The extra contribution they make to the channel really does help us with so many of the things we do that we get to bring to everybody. In return, we put some of these out on Buy It Now so that they have first dibs on them if they choose. If you are not a member and you're interested in that, well, please go below the dash line in the description of this or any other video, and you will be able to see underneath the links, because we have the links to all the eBay stuff on this video, a section that says memberships, and it will tell you all about it and what the perks are. Our next piece is also a paperweight, but this one is significantly older. This one dates to about 1910, and it shows the Soldiers Monument, which is directly opposite the Central National Bank of Peoria. Central National Bank in the 19-teens had the very famous architecture firm of Daniel Burnham from Chicago build them a wonderful 10-story Renaissance Revival skyscraper building, which is still there today and still has a bank in it. It's not the Central National Bank anymore, but it is still a bank on Courthouse Square, and it still overlooks the Illinois River and the Soldiers Monument. The Soldiers Monument itself was pretty significant too. It was designed by a local sculptor named Fritz Treibel, but Fritz Treibel had actually already moved to Rome. He ended up working in Rome and then in New York. He was a very famous sculptor. He has 2 pieces of sculpture in the National Statuary Hall collection in Washington, D.C. And if you look at the detail, it's quite elegant. This was done in 1899 as a Civil War remembrance. He also showed 6 works at the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. So he was a very significant sculptor. His father had been a stonemaker in Germany, and that's where he learned the trade. So you can still go see this monument today. The paperweight is in good shape overall. There's one tiny, tiny little nick right below where it says Main and Adams Streets, right above my thumb there. I just want to show that for full disclosure, but the overall condition is very, very good. A lot of these old advertising brick paperweights made of glass got so worn that you have to have them polished off to see the surface. So this one is really very clean compared to a lot that we see, considering that these are true antique made well over 100 years ago. There is one other significant sculpture in Peoria as well, and that is a sculpture of Richard Pryor, who was born there in 1940 and raised in his grandmother's brothel. He had a very hard life, but he sure brought a lot of merriment to a lot of us about it. So you can go to Peoria and you can see both of those important sculptures within a several block range of each other. It is really a Masonic pin. The Knights Templar claim to herald back from the original Knights Templar, who were part of the Crusades back in the 1100s. And they use the red cross that was seen by Constantine the Emperor when he converted to Christianity. And in Latin, in the middle, it says, "In hoc signo vinces." I hope I'm saying that close to right. "In this sign you shall conquer." So they trace themselves back to the conquerors. There's not a direct relation that's provable between the conquerors and this organization. That actually started as a legend in the 1600s in England when this particular branch of Masonry began. You can see this is an old piece. It has a C clasp, which means it does not have a safety catch. This is typical of late Victorian and very early 20th century work, and this should date with this nice red enameling to about 1900. The enameling overall is in good shape. There's a little bit of loss around the center. I say loss, but honestly, I'm not sure it was ever fully applied. It's so small, it may just be factory flaw. I like to be very critical of condition on everything because I'm seeing it up close and the people who are shopping online are not. It is much better to overplay a condition flaw and have people be satisfied than to underplay it and then have them be upset and want a refund or call you a scammer or give you bad feedback. While the relationship between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar within the Masonic orders is complicated, the symbology is very straightforward on this pin, and that is the real appeal. I think it's a very pretty piece. We're starting it at only $9.99. I think this piece could sell for $35 or $40, possibly more. I haven't seen this piece sell, and some of these Masonic pins for Knights Templar go for as much as $75 to $100. So we're going to let the market tell us on this one. We're not going to be able to do a buy it now on it because we just don't know exactly where this should end, and we're going to let the folks who are bidding on it tell us. Now, this flight we are not doing as long an auction period as we usually do because my travel schedule is such that I need to get these things out and shipped. And so this will be a shorter period. And so if you think these things are interesting, do follow along and check them out now because they will not be out for sale very long. This is something that resellers can follow along, collectors can follow along, and it just gives you an idea of how a range of different things that we find interesting are selling in the marketplace right now. And one of those things, and I have to say I really smiled when I saw this, is this jacket. Could this be more 1980s or 90s? I'm going to have to stand back so you can see the whole thing. And there it is. I feel like we're dating. This is a North Beach jacket, and North Beach leather was a very famous outfit, actually. They started in San Francisco back in the hippie days. They started first in LA and then realized that the hippies in San Francisco were their best customers, and so they moved up there. They had a lot of people out of Berkeley buying back in the days of leather and fringe. And by the 1980s, of course, styles had changed. In the 70s, they were producing for Elton John, and they were producing custom for Elvis. So they had a big name by the 1980s. And Michael Hoban, whose name is here on the label, was one of the designers. Now, by this time, these were made offshore, but they were made to their designs. And what a design it is. Turquoise is coming back into fashion, but when I look at this, I think of all of those Sheena Easton and Pat Benatar videos back in the 1980s where they wore these short little coats. This is a size 7 or 8, so it's actually a reasonable size that a lot of people can wear, and it's got all the zippers, because zippers, zippers, zippers. Thank you, Michael Jackson, for making zippers the thing in this period of time. Lots of zippers, lots of snaps, nice long arms, and a short coat. Because North Beach leather did so well in the heyday of that time, they ended up having almost a dozen stores and were very, very popular. And their styles spread from San Francisco to the LA fashion market to MTV to the world. And so for a while, they were really the hot item. And they are hot again. 1980s and 90s clothing is definitely where a lot of the interest is in vintage clothing now, and part of that is because these are sizes that fit modern women. And for that reason, as well as that really hot style, we're seeing this appealing to a new generation of vintage fashion lovers. We're going to start it out at $79, which is less expensive than I've seen any of these clothes for on eBay. And we're going to let it roll from there. My thought is that it might be worth $150 or more. Some of their pieces are worth 4 figures. So North Beach, definitely a label to look for. Reaching back in time, there is nothing more appealing to a lot of collectors and cooks and nostalgia seekers as a 1950s kitchen. And these two items, which are being sold together, are a very fun little collectible related to a 1950s kitchen. And you're going to think they look kind of funky at first, and that's because they are in their original cellophane. I'm going to take one out because it's loose enough, and the other one we're leaving in the original cellophane. These are little banks, and they are promotions from an outfit called Youngstown Kitchens. Youngstown Kitchens in Ohio was one of various makers of the first all-steel kitchens right around the time of the end of the Second World War. You can see it's been in the cellophane so long that it's actually left some marks. I'm not going to try to clean those off. They might, but I'm going to leave that for the new owner. This is an exact plastic miniature of the 48-inch deluxe twin cabinet sink, except a slot has been put in the back so you can use it as a bank, and see, there it is. If you have a 1950s house and are restoring it to original vintage, if you have the good fortune to have your old Youngstown kitchen or an all-steel kitchen, well, you know what a cool thing it is. And if you don't, then you're probably trying to find some of these in the real world in full size to put that back. This one is kitchen jet tower dishwasher. That was a lot of extra money for them, so they were very motivated. And so these little banks are actually harder to find than the sinks. These were given partly to children to keep them busy if their parents were shopping in a cabinet shop or some sort of a hardware store that sold such things. But they were also given to the people of the house so that they could save money towards getting their Youngstown kitchen and remember who they were supposed to get it from when the money was there. I'm not sure how many banks you would have had to fill to buy these back in the day, but I imagine it was several. There are a couple of different collectors for these now, potentially. It could be somebody who collects banks, it could be somebody who collects dollhouse miniatures, or it could be somebody who just has nostalgia for the 1950s kitchen and wants to put them in their 1950s kitchen. They're very cute. They're obviously in perfect condition because they're in the original cellophane, which will come with them. And we're going to start these at $9.99. They will have a buy it now of $30, which I think is actually pretty reasonable because just the sink alone can sell for as much as $25 plus shipping. I've seen it happen. So I think the two of them together, especially because the dishwasher is harder to find, that's a pretty nice price for somebody, and we'll see if they snatch it up right away or if they put a bid in and let it run up and see where it goes. You too can have everything plus the kitchen sink. We occasionally get comic books. I get asked all the time if I have comic books for sale. I don't often come into comic books, but I came into this one, and this one's pretty interesting. It's newer than the Golden Age. This is actually from 1987, but it is ROM number 1. And ROM number 1 was part of the Megaton universe. Megaton was a pretty obscure outfit at the time that it was producing these, but it ended up being seminal in the careers of several illustrators, and it also ended up spawning what is now the third largest comic publisher in the country. Gary S. Carlson was the publisher, and he was a Chicagoland comic book enthusiast, and he was working with other people who had a lot of traction in that industry in that area as well, including Chris Ecker. Their intent was to create a different class of superheroes and also to give fledgling artists and people who were not wanting to work for a big company and turn all of their rights and royalties over a chance to work for a small outfit where they would have more control over the work. One of the reasons this particular issue, besides being number 1 in an obscure series, is of value is because it also had an ad for Titans Legion X-Men, no way, Youngblood. And they are advertising that Youngblood is going to come out from Megaton Comics. Well, it never did, but Rob Liefeld did end up getting it out in 1992, and that was part of Image Comics, which is now the third largest comic producer in the country and is devoted to artists who want to maintain control of their own work. So it ended up being a rather important comic book in the pantheon of comic books for reasons not necessarily clear at the time that it was printed. And that's the reason that this is pretty collectible. I would say this is in probably fine to very fine condition. There's a little bit of bumping on a corner. It's been handled a few times, but overall it's in nice shape. The binding is tight. And I have seen these in this condition sell for around $35 to $40, and they can be even higher from there. We're going to start this one at just $9.99, but there is such interest in superheroes and in obscure comics of this era. So there is definitely a collector out there for this, and we're going to find out who they are. Next, we have a fun piece that features my favorite Disney character, and that is Pluto the Pup. Pluto the Pup was different than any other cartoon character up to his time because he was not anthropomorphic. He behaved pretty much like a real dog, and he was supposed to be Mickey Mouse's dog, so that was the point. He is one of the Sensational Six, the original characters from Disney. He came out in 1931, a year after the discovery of the planet Pluto. I'm still maintaining it's a planet. I don't care what they say. I know they keep redefining it, but it's out there in space anyway, whatever it is. This is a Bakelite pencil sharpener, and this would have been done sometime probably in the late 1930s. It's in good condition overall. No breaks or losses or anything. You can certainly sharpen your pencil with it. Bakelite was a pretty phenomenal material for its time. It was actually considered an engineering marvel when it came out in the 19 teens, and by the 1930s they had learned how to reformulate it as Catalin, and in Catalin you could inject color. And so you start having jewelry and finials and knobs and handles for chrome appliances and all sorts of things made of Bakelite because it was carvable. And it was very hard. It could withstand 100,000 volts, which is why it was invented to be used as insulators on telephone poles so that they could quit using the glass ones that would break. And then it ended up being used for everything from telephones to Viewmaster reels. A very malleable and yet very hard and sturdy material. And great colors. This one has a little bit of mottling in the red. Pluto did win an Oscar in 1942 for the show Lenda Pa, which is pretty remarkable because, again, Pluto does not talk. So everything is about physical comedy and expressions. One of my favorites is when he is dreaming that he is up before the kangaroo court full of cats, and they, of course, find him guilty and are very happy about it. And he wakes up from a horrible dream. Pluto is 93 years old now, and he still looks great, and this is probably in the 85-year-old range, and it still looks great too. We're going to start it at $9.99. They typically sell for between 2 and 3 times that, so we're going to put this out and see whether it goes to a Disney enthusiast, a Bakelite collector, or someone who is all of those. I do enjoy looking for a lot of different things when I do these because it's just fun to share the enthusiasm and all the different things that people like to collect. It's also interesting to see who buys them, what parts of the country like what sorts of things, and so do follow along with the listings. The links are in the description below. Every time I say I'm not going to put another piece of Fenton on this month, something really fun comes along, or I get a piece that people say, please put that on. And that was the case. This is being put on by viewer request because I had a couple of viewers who were interested in this. And I can see why, because it's a really beautiful Fenton Burmese basket. And this one is, of course, uranium glass and will glow like crazy under a black light. But it's also one of their later artware pieces. I love the beautiful blue bird on there, and it was painted by a friend of ours, someone I've gotten to meet, and that is Trudy Mendenhall. Trudy Mendenhall came to work for Fenton back in the 1970s or 80s. She is still painting on Fenton glass today now that she is in her 80s. She actually works with Rosie's Auction House, and they take basic, simple, not super valuable Fenton pieces, and she continues to treat them so that they can adhere paint, and she continues to paint on them, although she is not doing reproductions of original Fenton patterns. She's doing her own thing, and I just think it's really cool that she still has the love for it and wants to do it at this point in her life. She was also responsible for doing all of their jewelry when they had their jewelry line. She's pretty significant. Also significant are these people on the bottom. This is a limited edition. It's part of the family series. So you have all of the printed signatures of all of the family at that time. You can see that it was designed by Spindler, who did a lot of this artware in that time. It was an edition of just under 3,000. They were $150 new. That is our buy it now on this one. They are still selling for that price. And they're selling to people who love Fenton glass, as well as people who love uranium glass. So it's just a treat to be able to show this to you. And I just thought because it was a piece that people specifically requested and was painted by somebody we know, that it would be fun to show it. We do have a buy it now at the $150 level on this piece. But it's possible that you might get a deal on it because the starting bid is less than that. Well, here's a switch. We're going to move from Fenton to fascism. How's that for a segue? And that is because we have this chalk figure. And he looks sort of cute to us now, but he wasn't cute during World War II. This is Benito Mussolini. Fascism is a government where a strong man places nationalism and often racism above individuality and is enforced using centralized autocratic dictatorial control with economic and social order through forced suppression of opposition. And that's exactly what Mussolini did. He was named prime minister in 1922. He then took over the army. He was opposed to egalitarian ideals and wanted a nationalist revolution, and used that to justify expanding Italy's reach by taking over places like parts of Yugoslavia and Ethiopia and invading. And he ended up being thrown out of the League of Nations and decided to join with Hitler and Japan in the Axis powers. So when World War II started, he was one of our enemies, and this was done by a company in New York City. It is a chalkware piece. It has a few little scrapes and scratches here and there, but no chips, no losses. Patent pending for 1942. And on the bottom, it has this wonderful information here. Rambunctious bonito. Musso's mouth is large and round. The noise it makes is an awful sound. Here's the likeness of his face. Dump your refuse in the proper place. Patent pending. This is made by this outfit, Basson's Dummy Products in New York. There were a lot of chalkware caricatures of Hitler, some of Mussolini, a few of Tojo and the Japanese that were created right at the beginning of the Second World War because people were really, really angry. And these were ways, in a way, to defame them. There were a lot of Hitler posed as a skunk, for example. And then you would use them as banks or to throw your trash in or your dirty Kleenex or whatever, because these were bad people. And fascism was and is a terrible thing. And Mussolini invented it, but he unfortunately is not the last person to try to implement such a system in their country. So this is going out on eBay right now. I have not seen one of these sell. Usually we see pieces like this sell over $100 when they're Hitler related. I suspect this will do the same. We're going to start it at $75 and see where it goes. Well, of course, things turned out in the end. We defeated fascism, and Eisenhower was our big general, and everybody liked Ike. Everybody liked Ike a whole lot, and by 1948 they were begging him to run against Thomas Dewey for the Republican nomination, and he refused because he thought that the world really didn't need military leaders. They needed to get back to where citizens ran their government, and he was reluctant to run for president. He was still reluctant in 1952, but by 1952, the Korean War was not going well. The Russians and the Chinese had the atomic bomb. There was a lot of fear in the country of what was going to happen next, and the perception that they needed somebody who had a military background to keep things stable. Ike still didn't want to run. Henry Cabot Lodge put him on the New Hampshire primary against his will, and then he did very well in New Hampshire. And there was acclamation at a rally at Madison Square Garden where people spontaneously started shouting, "We like Ike." And that was where the slogan came from. It ended up being used in a television commercial. Television was a new idea in 1952. The political campaign that year, in today's dollars, all of the presidential campaigns total spent $68 million in today's dollars on the campaign. This year we have an election coming and they will spend $2 billion, which might tell you something about the influence of money in politics and how that has grown, as Eisenhower warned it would in his farewell address when he warned of letting the military-industrial complex take over politics. So Eisenhower was well-liked, and this is from 1956, when he was running for election the second time. It has the Republican elephant, front and back, with rhinestones. It's a 6.5-inch wrist bracelet, and it was a little snazzier than a lot of the cheap pin back buttons and less expensive jewelry that they did for that campaign. So it's a little harder to find. We're going to start this out at $9.99. I'm not sure if we're doing a buy it now or we're just going to let it run. We'll decide that when we put the listing out. This is another thing my mother collected, and I grew up with these because she always picked them up at garage sales and estate sales when she saw them, because perfume was expensive and that was the way that she could afford it. And these are just so much fun. These are Sophisticats. Sophisticat says so right on the bottom. And they use various colognes or perfumes in them. This one is Hypnotique. The Sophisticat earlier versions came with a metal locket around the neck. Later versions had pearls. This came out in 1954 and was such a great way to do small bottles of perfume in a gift package that it continued to be made into the 1970s. Love the psychedelic feathers. They came in various colors. You see orange, you see a magenta, you see this lemon yellow, and the rhinestone eyes always match the feathers. So this one has yellow eyes. Now the domes, because they're plastic and acrylic, tend to age a little bit, so we'll take it out so you can see how cool it really is. And there it is with its pearl necklace. Hypnotique itself was a rather important perfume fragrance. It was a Max Factor line, and Maximilian Factorwitz came to the States in 1909, started his company. He was a great wig maker, and he became the makeup artist for the stars in early Hollywood because he was able to make them look glamorous, but still real and not pancaked makeup. And so his product became very popular in drugstores all across the country. And so in 1958, they hired Laszlo Lengyel, who was a perfumer, and he created a scent called Hypnotique, which is in this bottle. And it smells something like roses and citrus with a little bit of an oak moss flavor. It's actually a very nice fragrance. And Hypnotique ended up being Laszlo Lengyel's most famous perfume by far. He only formulated 5 commercial perfumes in his time, and this one is one of the top 20 fragrances in perfume history in terms of sales. And part of the reason for that was Helen Gurley Brown, who ended up being the Cosmopolitan editor, wrote the book Sex and the Single Girl in 1962, which was quite controversial, and she talked about the allure of Hypnotique and how it should be worn liberally everywhere. We're going to start that out at a $15 opening bid, and let's see what happens then. Well, I sure like variety, don't I? Because we go from pretty glass and perfume and vintage clothing to license plates. But these are pretty good license plates because they are new in the original package and were never put on a car. This is the 1961 Illinois set, and you see on the back of the sleeve, they have adopted the Land of Lincoln as their slogan. A lot of states started putting slogans on license plates in the 1940s and 50s as a tourism promotion, and Land of Lincoln became Illinois. Now, when you take this out, it's a little tight because these never were put on the car. There is a pair because Illinois required front and back plates. License plates started out in Massachusetts in 1903. Illinois didn't start requiring them until 1911, when cars became fast enough and plentiful enough that identification and security and theft all became issues. Here's the other plate, and in between the two plates is this. You can see the impression of the numbers on it because it's been in there since 1961. But this was your auto passport. It kept the plates from scraping, and it also told you important things like what shape the signs were so that you knew when you were supposed to stop or slow down, and that you were to obey all of the speed limits and other rules in the state of Illinois. Illinois license plates in particular are kind of interesting because in the Second World War and until the late 40s, they made them of fiberboard and soybeans in order to help farmers there and also to save money and to save metal during the war effort. It took them a long time to switch from where you had to get a new license every year because these were made of steel. Illinois has a lot of rust issues with the salting of the roads, and so they would make you get a new one every year. They finally started making them out of aluminum, and it wasn't until the late 1970s that they started doing license tabs so you didn't have to replace your license plate every year. And why do we sell license plates? Well, people buy them in sets like that, some because they just collect them. I have collectors who want plates from every state in the Union. I have people who want license plates from all over the world. I have people who use them. I have one woman who covered up a cracked wall in a house with license plates and did an entire wall in them as a decorative statement. But the reason these sets in the original envelopes tend to go for more money is because they often go to people who have restored a vehicle from that year, or have a great original that's in really good condition, and they want something that's in mint condition that they can put on their card. So those are some of the people who collect these, and it'll be interesting to see who wants these, but they do tend to go for a premium when they are all original and have all the original paperwork. I have really appreciated Russian lacquer boxes ever since I first started seeing them appearing in stores in the late 1980s and early 1990s. They were made for many years before that, but because of our frosty relations with the Soviet Union, we didn't really see a lot of them in this country until that time, and this one I think is quite beautiful. Russian lacquer boxes are typically based on fairy tales or legends. This particular one in the back, the woman in the white dress, is the Snow Maiden. The Snow Maiden was raised by the Snow Queen and is the granddaughter of Dead Moroz, who is Father Frost. And so she appears in a lot of pageants and things in Russia around Christmas and New Year's. It is based on Eastern Slavic tale. This one is called Russian Winter, and unlike most of them, it actually has the information about who the painter is and where it came from. Kolui is probably not the proper pronunciation, but it's as well as I can do. But you will see that written in Russian in the middle of the box. The middle of the box is usually where you see the town name. Oftentimes it's Polek, which was a town that created these for a long time, even before they were made in Kolui. But the latter town where this came from was known back in the 1600s for painting icons, and that was their main industry up until the Bolshevik Revolution, when religion became frowned on, and so they had to quit making icons. And so in the 1930s, they started making the lacquer boxes of paper mache like the towns around them did. But theirs are a little bit different in that they use a lot of curlicues and they tend to really fill the field. So you see all the stars there. I think it's just beautiful. The artist is Nikolai Serov, and his name is shown right there where I'm pointing. So the artist's name is off center and the town name is in the center. And this particular piece is in great shape. It's a little larger. I like the canted corners. It gives it a little more shape. A lot of the artists actually use magnifying glasses while they're painting this, because look at those tiny brush strokes. I think it's just an amazing, elaborate art. And there are books on these and also books on Russian fairy tales to go with them so that you can interpret them. It's a wonderful area to collect, and I sell these every time I get them. This is the first one I've actually put online, and I'm curious to see how it will do. We're starting it at $25, which would be a bargain price for this. We have a buy it now of $75, which is more typically what we see pieces this size with this much detail sell for. Well, we're getting close to that time of year when fancy dinners are served, and a fancy dinner bell that goes with your pattern might just be the thing you need. This is Franciscan Desert Rose. And this is a late stage piece for Desert Rose. Desert Rose came out in 1941, right after Franciscan Apple. It was the beginning of a dozen or so different lines of embossed dinnerware that was hand-painted. Embossed meaning that all of these details are raised and then they would paint on the details. Desert Rose sounds very Californian, which was intentional because California pottery was considered very good and California dinnerware was sought after. But in fact, this rose is typical of roses that you see growing in the Midwest and the North. And because of that, Franciscan, unlike a lot of their California competitors, was able to break out of the California and West Coast market, and Desert Rose became super popular all over the country and is in fact the most popular dinnerware pattern ever made. They made 60 million pieces in just the first 25 years of production. A lot of celebrities started to collect this pattern as well, and they did ad campaigns featuring Greer Garson and Dorothy Lamour and Joan Crawford, and Jackie Kennedy even had a set of Desert Rose commissioned for the White House. It has been on television shows like The Golden Girls. It is definitely something that people recognize. The go-alongs were largely made in the 1970s, and this bell would be a go-along. They made several pieces in the late 70s to extend the line and get people to buy more pieces who already had the dinnerware sets. And you can see this is American made because it has the stylized F for Franciscan that came out in the mid-70s. There was a Danbury mint bell with green paint that was done that is actually not as collectible as this one. So this is the one that people are more likely to be looking for. And Desert Rose was so popular that after Franciscans sold out and Wedgwood bought the company, they took all of the stuff over to England and continued to make it there, but they didn't put as much detail into it. And then they offshored it to China and other countries, and there was even less detail, and the quality got a little worse and a little worse. And unfortunately, because of that, it eventually went out of production in 2013 because they really ruined the reputation of what had been a very good quality wear. We're going to start this at just $9.99, but I do believe they typically sell in the $30 to $35 range. Now, I'm generally a stickler on condition, but this is a children's book, and it's an interesting one, and I just decided I was going to put it out anyway, even though it's a little battered and bruised. This was the teacher's copy of Singing Wheels, which is one of the Alice and Jerry books. Alice and Jerry books came out in 1938, created by an educator and curriculum director in Illinois by the name of Mabel O'Donnell, and they were illustrated by a pair of sisters, the Hoop sisters. And they were competing with Dick and Jane books. Now, this is a 4th grade primer. They did various primers for kindergarten and preschool through 6th grade in the Alice and Jerry series. There's your school property teacher's copy from Matawan, Michigan. And when you open up here, you'll see there's a little bit of a pencil mark. You know, these were used for years, and they were used by kids, but all the pages are there. Overall, it's in decent shape. There is the 1940 copyright. So this is earlier than it looks. We usually think 1950s for these. This book was still being checked out in the 1950s, though. You see a 1953 date on that library card in there. It has all of its pages. It's intact. It does have some bumps and bruises and a little bit of fraying and a little bit of soiling. It is not perfect by any means, but it's a fun book, and it definitely has a good look. If you're just collecting these for the cover, well, it'd look fun with a collection of Western stuff. But if you want to read to your kids and grandkids, well, that's how a lot of people read. If you weren't learning with Dick and Jane, you were probably learning with this. This was radical at the time because this was the look, see, and say, where there was a lot of repetition and it was not phonetically based. And a lot of educators at the time did not like that about it because they thought children should learn phonics. But the concept behind these was just repeat and repeat and they'll get it. And I'm sure it worked for a lot of people. People learn different ways. So this piece is going to go on for just $4.99 and a buy it now of $9.99. This next item is something I really enjoy because I like sea critters and I like glass and I like this sort of decorating. And this is it. This is Italian. Blanco and Pilgrim and lots of other companies made big mouth fish too. And since we're near Thanksgiving, you could consider it a cornucopia. But notice the roundness of the Italian fish's mouth. Blanco tended to be a little more oblong, either sideways or up and down, depending on the shape of the fish. Pilgrim usually did crackle fish, and they're longer and skinnier. This piece is definitely Italian. Now, there's a big question about these. Are they Empoli? Everybody is listing them as Empoli. I have to say I am not entirely sure about that. I'm going to list it as Empoli or Venetian glass. I don't think it's of the quality of a Murano company, but it definitely has the applied pieces with the pinching and the pulling that I associate more with Venetian glass as opposed to Empoli glass, which typically, in my estimation, is either cased in multiple colors if it's this thick, or it's thinner and usually has more to do with wine bottles and decanters and chalices and that sort of thing. So I have not yet been able to ascertain for certain. Everybody is listing them as Empoli, so I will put that in, but I'm actually leaning towards Venetian because of the quality of the polishing on the mouth and the way it's done. I suppose it really is splitting hairs. The main point is that it's a really cool piece of Italian glass, And the Capri Blue was very popular in the 1960s and again in the 1980s, and it could date to either of those decades. It's in great shape, no chips or cracks. I just think it's such a cool look. In the 1980s, people tended to fill these with colored or clear marbles, but you could do just about anything you wanted. You could even have things coming out of it for Thanksgiving if you're having a seafood Thanksgiving instead of the traditional turkey. So I think it's really fun, and I think someone else will too. I have something similar in my house, or I would have kept it. It's definitely my colors, and I just think that it's really well crafted. So we're going to start this at $39.99, which is really a very cheap price for this. It should sell usually $85 to $125 depending, and then shipping, because they are substantial, they're large, and there are a lot of collectors for this kind of glass these days. I've been selling off a big collection of Star Wars collector figures from the early movies, and I am down to my last one, and this is it. And it's a good one. I did not realize how good. I just set it aside thinking it was interesting looking. Well, it's pretty interesting, all right. Just the backs of these, meaning with the figure gone and the blister pack gone, I've seen prices over $200 completed sales. This apparently is pretty hard to find because when Kenner made this in 1980 for The Empire Strikes Back, the FX-7 medical assistance droid was an interesting thing because it spun, and so Kenner had to make it so it spun. The little arm dispenses things like anesthesia. The spinning top was full of sensors. This was to help medtech industries work during the Galactic Civil War so that the Rebel Alliance at Echo Base could be taken care of between battles. And this meant that the cap rotated 360 degrees, and the gray tubular body with the 360 degree spin was also part of the toy feature. So a little more complex than the average stand-up character. By this time there were 41. This is a 41 back. It's always important to discuss that. Other things that are important to collectors of these: it is not punched, meaning that it was never hung on a display rack. Lots of these were just laying loose in piles in stores, and so if it still has that, that's actually more desirable. It's not bumped or bruised on the blister pack, and it's never been removed. And those are all things that are important. I have seen ones that say they have a 31 back sell for as much as $700. We're putting this out at $9.99, folks. It's our last one. We're just going to see where it goes. And somebody might get an incredible deal, but people do know what these are, and they do look for them, and there is an active market, and that's why I'm willing to take a chance like that. If it was something where, well, we're not sure if we're going to get a lot of bidders, well, I would never start it out at that low price. But sometimes it's fun when you know you're going to sell the piece and you know what you have in it and that you can let it go, to just let the market do the work for you. It's also going to come with a mailing box and display box that will protect it very well. We saw something earlier from the Freemasons referring to the conquest, and of course the Freemasons were a very religious-based organization. There was another organization that was founded in 1883 that was quite secular in this country, and that was the Modern Woodmen of America. And this is a memoriam ribbon from sometime between 1883 and about 1900, with metal fringe. It says, "Our Okie, camp number 9147, in memoriam." There is the clip on top. Beautiful, sad, and stately. Part of the reason for fraternal organizations, particularly this one, was that there were not unions, there were not pensions, and if somebody died, they might leave a family with nothing, who would be destitute. And so this was one of the first fraternal insurance organizations. It is still an insurance company to this day, a rather large one, in fact. It was founded by Joseph Cullen Root specifically to help the families of deceased members. On the back, it has another interesting ribbon This one is in a little worse shape. I suspect that planchet on the bottom probably had a picture of the deceased. I'm not exactly sure how this would be worn because it's worn on the side you can't see. And some of the red silk has disappeared and the flag has a little bit of a rent, so we want to make sure we show the condition of that. But it's a really interesting piece all in all. And we see these occasionally. When they're found, they're usually found in scrapbooks, old family scrapbooks. And so the front of this one is in really great shape. He called it modern woodmen because he watched the farmers clearing the trees in the fields. It wasn't strictly just for lumbermen, but it definitely is an organization that helped a lot of people and still is helping people. This is going to start also at $9.99. I know that they have greater value than that, and we're going to find out together what that value is now. And that brings us to our last piece, and this is a beautiful little piece. It would make a lovely gift, as I'm sure it did back in the 1930s when it was new. And it is this Elgin, Illinois, Art Deco designed sterling cigarette case. Now, eBay has a little problem with me with cigarettes. They don't like me listing tobacco-related items because of a misunderstanding where a friend of mine who had quit smoking gave me her e-cigarette to sell. And after I sold it and they let me, then they told me that I had done a terrible thing because I don't have an ATF license. I didn't realize I was supposed to. And so now I'm not allowed to sell anything tobacco related. So we will be listing this as a card holder, which is how most people are using them today anyway. It's got a beautiful vermeil, which is that gold wash in turned metal. It's marked sterling both on right here and on the clasp. And the clasp is with the maker's name, Elgen American. Elgen American was a maker of various accessories, compacts. They made a lot of really good stuff. They were called Elgin American because they wanted to take advantage of the Elgin Watch Company's reputation, and so they stole their name essentially, were sued and had to add the word American so that people would know that there was a distinction between the watch company and the makers of these cases. They made really good stuff in their own right. I don't know why they had to do that, but you know, people are always looking for some sort of an advantage, I guess. And this piece, by the time it was made in the 1930s, would have cost about $2.65 for the silver content plus whatever it took to make it, and it would have sold for somewhere in the $15 to $20 range, which was a real premium at that time. Well, now, just based on the silver value, this should be worth over $100, and they typically do sell for over $100. And we are going to put this one out. We do have, and we're going to put this one out now. It's in really good condition. I love the Art Deco design. It's great that it doesn't have a monogram. You can always polish a monogram out of sterling without it affecting it, but it's nice to not have to do that. Silver plate, once it's monogrammed, if you polish it down, you reveal the base metal. It'll never look right. Another thing that people are doing with these is using them as billfolds because it's a good size for that. And I do like the fact that this one is the right size. Also, a little tip, anytime you have a case like this, push the button down and then put it back together rather than clicking, 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 because eventually you will wear that out. And this has lasted 90 years. So we'd like it to make it to the next 90. We are going to put this out on eBay along with all these other things now. It has been so much fun looking for interesting stuff and gathering it to show you. And I can't wait to see how this all does. So have fun with us and follow along in the listings. And we will report back to you with a What Sold video when it all wraps up.
If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.